The smell was the first thing Sergeant Mitch Conway noticed. It wasn't just the usual stink of sweat and mildew that clung to the walls of Everglade Correctional Facility, it was sharper, thicker, blood. Mitch had been working corrections for over 20 years, long enough to know what a fresh crime scene smelled like. But this was different. This wasn't an inmate scuffle in the yard or a cheap shank job in the showers. This was something else. He stepped inside the small office, his boots squelching against the floor. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, casting harsh shadows over the chaos. A desk, once neat and organized, was overturned. Papers, reports, forms, and a half-finished crossword puzzle were scattered across the floor, soaking up the blood. A chair lay on its side, one of its legs broken clean off. The walls were streaked with red, thick splatters that dripped in jagged lines, as though the victim had tried to fight back. And there, in the center of it all, lay Raymond Ray Dwyer. He wasn't just dead. He had been destroyed. His uniform, once pressed and neat, was torn and blood-soaked. His left eye socket was shattered, the bone caved in from blunt force trauma. His lips were split, his jaw broken at an unnatural angle. There were deep, jagged gashes running from his shoulder down to his forearm, exposing torn flesh and muscle. His fingers were bent in impossible directions, snapped like twigs. Mitch took a deep breath, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. He had seen bodies before. Murders, suicides, overdoses, but this wasn't a simple killing. This was personal. Whoever did this had wanted Ray to suffer. The radio on his hip crackled. "Sarge, we got officers heading your way. We securing the block." Mitch pressed the button. "Lock it down. No one moves without my say-so." "Copy that." He let out a slow breath and turned, scanning the room for anything that might tell him why. Ray Dwyer wasn't well-liked, but he wasn't the type to start trouble either. He had been at Everglade for 15 years, working his way up from a rookie officer to a senior guard. He kept his distance from the inmates, followed the rules. He wasn't one of those corrupt types that let things slide for the right price, at least not as far as Mitch knew. But this wasn't some random attack. Mitch crouched beside the body, careful not to step in the thick pool of blood beneath Ray's head. His hand reached for the small radio clip to Ray's vest. He clicked it. Static. Dead. Whoever did this had thought ahead. His gaze flicked to the broken lamp in the corner. The shade was stained dark, its bulb shattered. It didn't take much to guess what had happened. Someone had used it to bludgeon Ray, not to kill him instantly but to weaken him. Then they had gone to work. Mitch's jaw clenched. The inmates would know something by now. Word traveled fast in prison, even faster than guards could contain it. If this was retaliation for something, it wouldn't stay quiet for long. He pulled himself to his feet just as another officer, a younger guy named Rogers, stepped into the room. Rogers stopped short, his face going pale. "Jesus," he whispered. "Sarge, what the hell happened?" Mitch didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes landed on the office window. The glass pane had been pushed open slightly, letting in the humid Florida air. An escape route? No. More likely, the killers wanted to let the smell out, just enough to delay someone from noticing too soon. Mitch exhaled. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "But we're gonna find out." He turned back to Ray's ruined body and frowned. Something about this wasn't adding up. Why had they left him in his office? If this had been an inmate attack, why not dump the body somewhere less obvious? Why leave this much of a mess? Unless they wanted him to be found. Unless this was a message. Mitch's gut twisted. Ray Dwyer was dead. And 3 inmates, Jace Ghost Holloway, Malik Slim Carter, and Bruno Vargas, were about to become prime suspects in one of the most brutal killings Everglade had ever seen. Raymond Ray Dwyer had been a fixture at Everglade Correctional Facility for 15 years. He wasn't the friendliest guard, nor was he the cruelest. He was the kind that kept his head down, did his job, and went home. At least that was what most people believed. But prisons have their own kind of currency, and power doesn't come from just wearing a badge. It comes from the shadows, whispered favors, unspoken threats, and knowing which rules can be bent without breaking. And Ray? He had learned to navigate those shadows well. He had his favorites. Everyone did. Jace Ghost Holloway was one of them. Jace was an ex-biker, the kind of man who carried violence in his veins but wore silence like a shield. He was tall, lean, and covered in old ink, tattoos from a past life that still clung to him like ghosts. People feared him, not because he was the loudest but because he wasn't. He didn't make threats. He didn't need to. Ray had taken a liking to him. Maybe it was the way Jace never begged for anything. Maybe it was the quiet power he carried. Maybe it was something darker, something neither of them spoke about. Then there was Malik Slim Carter. If Jace was the silent storm, Slim was the smooth operator. He had been a conman on the outside, charming rich women out of their money, slipping through life with a silver tongue and a devil's grin. Even inside he knew how to play people. He knew how to read them. And he knew Ray better than Ray realized. The way Ray looked at him? The small favors, the little extra freedoms? Slim had seen it before. Ray had a weakness. And Slim knew how to use it. The third piece of the puzzle was Bruno Vargas. Bruno wasn't like the other two. He didn't think. He reacted. Built like a bull with thick arms and a permanent scowl, Bruno had been in and out of juvie before he even turned 14. By the time he landed in Everglade, he had already racked up a life sentence. He wasn't getting out and he didn't care who knew it. The only thing that mattered to Bruno was respect. And the worst thing a man could do in prison was make him feel like a fool. Ray had been careful at first. The late-night meetings started off innocent enough. Jace needed favors. Slim wanted protection. Bruno just needed an outlet for his temper. Ray gave them what they wanted and in return he got control. But power is a tricky thing in prison. It's never really yours, it's borrowed. And Ray had borrowed from the wrong men. At first the rumors were just whispers. The kind of gossip that floated through the cells, slipping under doors and through barred windows. You hear about Dwyer? Man's got a side hustle going on. Real personal. Ghost and Slim? Yeah, they ain't just getting extra food trays. Ray had been playing a dangerous game. He thought he was in control, that the walls of the prison would protect him. But then Jace got sick. At first it was just the weight loss. His already lean frame started to shrink. Then came the night sweats, the sores in his mouth, the fatigue that made his hands shake when he tried to light a cigarette. He knew before the infirmary even ran the test. HIV. Jace wasn't stupid. He had been careful, except with Ray. It wasn't just the diagnosis that broke him. It was who had given it to him. Prison changes a man, but betrayal? Betrayal turns that change into something deadly. Jace didn't say much. He didn't explode in rage. He didn't cry. He just sat there in his cell, staring at the wall, tracing the faded skull tattoo on his wrist. Slim, on the other hand, felt everything. He had always prided himself on being 2 steps ahead of everyone. On knowing who to trust, who to play, who to stay away from. But Ray had tricked him. He had taken what he wanted and left poison behind. Slim was a talker, but Bruno? Bruno was a doer. It didn't take much to set him off. Slim didn't need to lie. He didn't even need to exaggerate. All he said was, "You think you're the first?" That was enough. Bruno was the kind of man who didn't need details. He didn't care about consequences. He just needed a target. And that night, Ray Dwyer became one. The plan wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. Revenge inside a prison is like a slow-burning fuse. It starts as a whisper, travels in the dark, and explodes when the time is right. For Jace Ghost Holloway, time didn't matter. He had already lost. For Malik Slim Carter, time was a game. He had played too many and he was done losing. For Bruno Vargas, time was up. The night of the kill, everything ran like clockwork. Ray Dwyer was predictable. Too predictable. He worked the same shift, took the same route, checked the same doors, and stayed late every night. It made him feel powerful, like he had control over the inmates, like he wasn't just another cog in the system. What he didn't realize was that the system was turning against him. Slim was the first piece of the puzzle. He didn't need to force Ray into that office. All it took was a well-placed smile, a casual lean against the wall, a whispered favor. Ray always took the bait. "Come on, boss," Slim murmured, standing in the dimly lit hallway. "Just need a little time to talk. You know how it is." Ray hesitated. He always did, just for a second, like he wanted to be sure no one was watching. Then he nodded. 5 minutes. That's it. Slim grinned. 5 minutes was all they needed. They walked through the quiet halls, past the cells where shadows stretched over the walls. Most inmates were already in their bunks, pretending to sleep but listening to every sound. Word had spread. Everyone knew what was about to happen, except for Ray. The office door clicked shut behind them. Inside waiting was Jace. He was perched on the edge of the desk, his fingers slowly tracing the faded skull tattoo on his wrist. His face was unreadable, his body still. If there was any anger left in him, it had been swallowed by something colder. Ray's eyes flicked between them. Something shifted in his expression, like he had just figured out the part of the story that didn't add up. "Jace," he said slowly, like he was piecing together a sentence that had too many missing words. "What's going on?" Jace didn't answer. He didn't need to, because Bruno was behind him. The first hit came fast. Ray didn't even have time to turn around before the pipe connected with the back of his leg. A sickening crack filled the small room, followed by a sharp gasp of pain as he collapsed to his knees. Bruno didn't stop. He never did. The next hit crushed into Ray's ribs, knocking the breath out of him. He coughed, choking on the taste of blood and panic. Slim was in front of him now, crouching, staring him dead in the eye. Ray's hands trembled, trying to push himself up, but Jace's boot pinned him down. It wasn't rage in Jace's face. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was nothing. "You knew," Jace said softly. "Not a question. A fact." Ray shook his head, but it was too late. Bruno brought the pipe down again, this time on Ray's arm. Another crack. A strangled cry. His fingers curled inward, useless. Slim leaned in closer, his voice a whisper against Ray's ear. "You thought you had control, didn't you?" Ray tried to say something, anything, but blood bubbled between his lips. Bruno raised the pipe again. This time he aimed for the head. The impact sent a thick splatter of blood across the office floor. Ray's body jerked, then went still. His eyes, half-lidded, stared at nothing. Silence filled the room. Slim let out a slow breath and sat back on his heels. Bruno wiped the sweat from his brow, looking down at the ruined mess of what used to be Raymond Dwyer. He exhaled, shaking out his shoulders. "That's it." Slim smirked. "That's it." Jace didn't say a word. He stepped over the body, walked to the desk and picked up a chair. Then he smashed it against the wall. Wood splintered. Papers flew. Blood dripped. They wanted this to be messy. They wanted this to be seen. They didn't run. They didn't panic. Slim wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, popped his neck and nodded toward the door. "Let's go." Bruno took one last look at Ray's body before rolling his shoulders and stepping out. Jace lingered a second longer. His eyes swept over the blood, the broken glass, the gashes carved into Ray's arms. For a moment, something flickered behind his expression. Then he turned away. They slipped into the hallway back toward the cell blocks. The smell of blood followed them. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. Because everyone already knew. By the time Sergeant Mitch Conway found the body, the three of them were back in their bunks, lying still, staring at the ceiling, waiting. And outside the cell doors, in the quiet hum of Everglade Correctional Facility, a new whisper traveled through the prison halls. Ray Dwyer was dead. And in prison, some debts are paid in blood. Everglade Correctional Facility was no stranger to violence. A shank fight in the yard, a busted lip in the showers, a broken nose over a gambling debt, these were everyday affairs. But a dead guard? That was different. That was war. The moment Ray Dwyer's body was found, the whole prison went into lockdown. Cell doors slammed shut. Sirens blared. Guards stormed through the halls like a tidal wave, barking orders, shoving inmates against walls, demanding answers. But no one said a word. Not because they didn't know. Because they did. There was a code in prison. Some things you didn't talk about. Some things were justice. Mitch Conway had one job now, find the killers. But he didn't need to. He already knew. The problem wasn't catching them. It was proving it. Jace Holloway sat across from him in the interrogation room, arms crossed, face blank. Mitch leaned forward. "You were one of the last people to see Dwyer alive." Jace didn't flinch. "I was in my cell." Mitch sighed, running a hand over his buzzed hair. "You know how this goes, Holloway. You keep quiet, you go down for this alone." Jace's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. "I already went down alone once. I ain't scared to do it again." Mitch clenched his jaw. He had seen men like Jace before. The quiet ones. The ones who didn't need to yell to be dangerous. Next was Slim. Malik Carter leaned back in his chair, his wrists cuffed to the table. He smirked. "You look stressed, Sarge. You should take a vacation." Mitch narrowed his eyes. "Carter, you think this is funny?" Slim shrugged. "I think Ray Dwyer made a lot of enemies." "You sure it was us?" Mitch slammed a folder on the table. Crime scene photos. Blood. Broken bones. The brutality of it. Slim barely glanced at them. Mitch's voice was low. This wasn't a normal hit. This wasn't just prison politics. Somebody wanted him to suffer. Slim's smirk faded. For the first time he looked at the pictures. Looked at what they had done. Then he leaned forward. "Some men deserve suffering." Mitch felt his stomach twist. He wasn't sure what sickened him more, the photos on the table or the truth in Slim's voice. Bruno was last. Unlike the other two, Bruno wasn't quiet. He was furious. "They put me in this box like an animal," he growled, pacing the small interrogation room. His chains rattled with every step. "They say I did it, huh? Where's the proof? Mitch exhaled through his nose. Bruno had proof all over him. Scratches on his knuckles. A bruise blooming across his jaw. You're sloppy, Vargas, Mitch said. You were never gonna get away with it. Bruno stopped pacing. He turned slowly, eyes dark. Who says I wanted to? By the time the interrogations were over, the warden had a decision to make. The prison couldn't afford the chaos of an unsolved murder. The inmates had already made their judgment. Now the guards had to make theirs. Mitch met with the other officers in the break room, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. They did it, one of them muttered. We all know it. Yeah, but why? Another said. This ain't just an inmate lashing out. They hated Dwyer. What was he into? Silence. Then, Mitch spoke. We don't ask questions we don't want answers to. Everyone nodded. Because Ray Dwyer wasn't a good man. And in prison, sometimes justice didn't come from a badge. Sometimes it came from a pipe in the dark. 3 days later, the case was officially closed. The cause of death? Inmate retaliation. The official story? A gang-related revenge attack. Jace, Slim, and Bruno were shipped off to solitary. For a while. The guards knew what happened. The inmates knew what happened. But no one spoke of it again. Ray Dwyer's body was buried in a small, quiet cemetery outside of town. There was no big ceremony. No speeches. No one came to visit. Inside Everglade Correctional Facility, life moved on. Another guard took Ray's place. Another new batch of inmates arrived. The days kept turning. But everyone remembered. Some men die in their sleep. Some die in the streets. And some, like Ray Dwyer, die for the secrets they kept. And in Everglade, some secrets were never meant to leave the prison walls.